Rain drummed on the asphalt, turning Yarrington's streets into mirrors, reflecting the gray sky and the dim city lights. Police sirens cut through the familiar silence of a neighborhood where apartment buildings seemed twinned with each other. Patrol Officer Tyrone Jackson was first on the call to Oak Street, number 26, apartment 114. A neighbor noticed the apartment door ajar, knocked, but no one answered, which struck her as suspicious. The body of a young woman lay on the floor of the living room, between the sofa and the coffee table. The glass surface of the table was splattered with red wine from an overturned glass. The woman was lying on her back, her wide-open eyes staring lifelessly at the ceiling. The signs of struggle were obvious. A toppled floor lamp, scattered sofa cushions, and a torn blouse on the victim spoke of fierce resistance. But most of all, the dark purple marks on her neck, clear signs of strangulation, attracted attention. "Death appears to have occurred about 12 hours ago," said the medical examiner, Dr. Lamont, squatting next to the body. "Strangulation. The killer was strong. Look at the depth of the finger marks." "ID?" came a deep voice from the doorway. A tall man with close-cropped gray hair entered the room. His dark brown face expressed the calmness that only comes with experience. Detective Python Brooks took off his coat, shaking the raindrops off of it, and slowly looked around the room, noting every detail. "Angela Laukas, 26 years old," Officer Jackson replied, holding out the driver's license he'd found. "The apartment is registered to her. Neighbor says she lived alone, rarely brought boyfriends over." Brooks nodded, accepting the papers. 20 years on the Yarrington police force had taught him to see more than just a crime scene. He saw a story, saw a life that had been cut short too soon. "Any signs of forced entry?" he asked, examining the front door. "None," Jackson replied. "The lock was intact, the door was just covered but not locked. She either knew the killer or she let him in willingly." Brooks moved slowly through the apartment, carefully stepping over the areas marked by forensics. The small but well-furnished apartment spoke of taste and some wealth. Designer furniture, quality appliances, several original paintings on the walls. There was a glossy fashion magazine on the coffee table and a half-empty bottle of expensive wine next to it. "Are the valuables in place?" Brooks asked, noticing the jewelry box on the dressing table in the bedroom. "As far as we can tell, nothing's missing," one of the forensic specialists replied. "There's some gold jewelry in the jewelry box and about $300 in cash in the purse." "So not a robbery," Brooks muttered, more to himself. In the bedroom, a framed photograph caught his eye, a smiling Angela with another girl against the ocean. Both were dressed bright and flashy, with professional makeup. Brooks made a mental note to find the victim's girlfriend. When the initial examination of the crime scene was complete, Brooks returned to the neighbor who had discovered the body. Mrs. Jenkins, a full-figured woman in her 60s, was nervously rubbing the edge of her robe as she sat in the kitchen of her apartment. "Angela and I weren't exactly close," she said, constantly adjusting her glasses on her nose. "But we always said hello. Nice girl, quiet. True, she had guests. Different ones." "Different?" Brooks interjected, raising an eyebrow. "Well, men, often different. But she always made sure they kept them quiet, didn't bother the neighbors, not like those students upstairs." "When was the last time you saw Ms. Laukas?" "Last night around 8 o'clock. She was on her way home, carrying a bag of groceries." "And today?" "No, I didn't see her today. But I heard someone come to her house last night around 9 o'clock. A man's voice, but it was quiet. Then it was quiet, and this morning I noticed her door was ajar. That wasn't like her at all. Angela always locked the door. I knocked, but no one answered, so I called the police." Brooks nodded understandingly. Judging by the time of death, this visitor could very well be the killer. "Anything else unusual in the last few days?" Mrs. Jenkins hesitated. "There was some kind of altercation a few days ago." A woman's voice, very angry, yelling at Angela. "Did you hear what they were arguing about?" "No, just some words. Something about a man, some shame." She shrugged. "I don't eavesdrop on purpose." After leaving the house, Brooks drove to the station, where he was faced with a lot of paperwork and the need to form an investigative team. Captain Monroe, always emphatically official, listened to the first report and nodded. "The murder of a young woman will cause a media frenzy. Work fast, Brooks, and carefully. Brooks spent the rest of the day gathering information on Angela Laukas. Born in Chicago, moved to Yerington 3 years ago. Officially worked as a consultant at a downtown fashion boutique. No priors, clean record. But Brooks was too experienced to miss the discrepancy between income and expenses. A consultant's salary could hardly afford to rent an apartment like this and buy designer clothes. His suspicions were confirmed when the victim's phone number was accessed. Several contacts were marked only by initials and recurring regular appointments on the calendar. Some numbers belonged to prominent Yerington businessmen. Payments were received in cash or via instant transfer apps from impersonal accounts. Escorts, Brooks stated, looking through the messages. Expensive escorts. The name Jenna was common among the contacts. Brooks decided to start with her. The number belonged to Jenna Wilson, and from the social media photo, Brooks recognized the girl who was with Angela in the bedroom photo. The next morning, Brooks met Jenna at a small cafe away from downtown. The young black woman with long braids kept a wary expression, tapping her fingernails nervously on her coffee cup. "We were friends," she said quietly. "Since college, I can't believe she's gone." "I need to know about her clients," Brooks said bluntly. "We understand what you both were doing." Jenna flinched, but quickly pulled herself together. "We weren't doing anything illegal, just escorting wealthy men to events, dinners, and the occasional overnight stay," Brooks finished for her. Jenna lowered her eyes. "Look, I'm not interested in the details of your business. I'm only interested in the killer." Brooks leaned closer. "Did any of the clients threaten Angela? Any conflicts?" "No, she was careful. She chose only decent men, usually married. They value their reputations." "And the regulars?" Brooks insisted. Jenna hesitated. "I can't. It's confidential." Brooks sighed heavily. "Jenna, your friend is dead, strangled. The man who did this is still out there, and may very well come after you if you know anything." Those words had an effect. Jenna turned pale and took a sip of water. She had one regular, important client, Andre Parker, owner of the Parker Plaza chain of stores. They'd been seeing each other for almost a year, once or twice a week. He was generous. Were they close? On a personal level? Angela said he fell in love with her, gave her expensive gifts, offered to help her start her own business. But he's married, of course. Did his wife know about the relationship? I don't think so. Although, Jenna frowned, the last couple weeks Angela's been kind of jumpy. Said she was having problems, but didn't specify what kind. Brooks made a note in his notebook. Andre Parker was a well-known figure in town, a successful businessman, a sponsor of charitable events, and a member of the city's Economic Development Board. Had Angela had a conflict with some woman recently? Perhaps with a client's wife? Jenna wondered. She didn't say directly, but a week ago, she mentioned that some arrogant bitch was trying to intimidate her. I assumed it had something to do with the client, but Angela changed the subject. Back at the station, Brooks went through Angela's cell phone one more time. Among the many contacts, the name Andre P. was particularly common. The last call from him had been 2 days before the murder, and the conversation had lasted nearly an hour. Examining the financial transactions, Brooks discovered regular receipts from an anonymous sender, amounts far in excess of the escort's usual fee. Angela was clearly special to this client. Brooks sighed and rubbed his tired eyes. He was about to leave when he decided to look at the crime scene photos again. Something was bugging him, some detail escaping his attention. And then he noticed it. In one of the pictures, a small package was visible in the bathroom, on a shelf behind the mirror. Brooks zoomed in on the image and froze. A pregnancy test. Positive. He immediately contacted the medical examiner, Dr. Lamont, see if the victim was pregnant. Brooks returned to her apartment and thoroughly searched every closet and drawer. In the top drawer of the dresser, under a pile of linens, he found an envelope of medical records, test results, and a referral for an ultrasound. Everything confirmed the pregnancy. Andre Parker's office occupied the entire top floor of a business center in Yerington's business district. Panoramic windows overlooked the city, and the minimalist interior with a predominance of glass and metal emphasized the status of the owner. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect posture, initially tried to keep Detective Brooks out. citing important meetings, but a police badge opened all the doors. Andre Parker met the detective standing, a tall, well-built man with a neat, short beard and wearing an impeccable suit. He radiated confidence and authority. His handshake was firm and his gaze was direct. "What can I do for the Yerington police?" he asked, pointing Brooks to the chair across from his desk. "I'm investigating the murder of Angela Laukis," Brooks began without preamble, watching his companion's reaction carefully. Parker froze for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. "Murder? That's terrible, but I don't understand what it has to do with me. Your number was in her cell phone. Multiple calls over the last year. The last one was 2 days before the murder." Parker sank slowly into his chair. "Ms. Laukis sometimes accompanied me to business dinners and corporate events. It was purely a business connection." "A business connection," Brooks repeated. "And how often did you use her services?" "Occasionally, maybe once a month. I have events where I need an attractive companion." "Couldn't your wife keep you company?" Parker pursed his lips. "Naomi has her own commitments, charity committees, social activities. We lead fairly independent lives." "So independent that you paid an escort thousands of dollars a month?" Brooks pulled out a printout of bank transfers. "That's a business expense," Parker replied coldly, "and I don't have to account to the police for my spending." "When was the last time you saw Ms. Laukis?" "I don't remember exactly. Maybe a week ago." "Not 2 days ago? After an hour-long phone call?" Parker gripped the armrests of his chair. "I don't have to memorize every conversation. I have hundreds of calls every day." "Isn't that too many calls for a purely business call?" Brooks leaned forward. "Minus Mr. Parker, we have reason to believe that your relationship with the victim was much closer than you're suggesting." "That's your speculation," Parker cut him off. "If you have specific allegations, speak up. If not, I'm a busy man. Did you know Ms. Laukis was pregnant?" Parker's face froze, and for a split second, fear flashed in his eyes. "Nuneptu. It's a surprise. For the baby's father, too?" "I had nothing to do with her pregnancy," Parker said firmly, but Brooks saw his hand tremble. "And I insist on having a lawyer present for further questions." Brooks nodded understandingly. The first round was over, but the detective got what he wanted. Parker was clearly nervous and hiding something. Leaving the businessman's office, Brooks did not go straight to the station. Instead, he went to the boutique where Angela officially worked. The employees of the store were shocked by the news of her death. The manager, an elegant woman in her 40s, confirmed that Angela worked part-time and often took time off. "She was a good saleswoman," the manager said, poring over papers in her office. "The customers loved her, especially the men." She raised an eyebrow meaningfully. "Did you know about her extra income?" "I don't interfere in the personal lives of my employees," the woman answered cautiously. But Angela made no secret of the fact that she was dating wealthy men, and her closet obviously cost more than a consultant's salary. Had she ever mentioned Andre Parker? The manager thought for a moment. No, she hadn't mentioned any names. But she hesitated. There was an unpleasant scene about a week ago. The wife of one of her, friend's wife came into the store, made a scene in front of the customers. "Can you describe this woman?" "Tall, slender, very well groomed, expensive clothes, jewelry, typical rich man's wife." "Did she identify herself?" "No, but she came in a black Mercedes with a driver, and I saw her picture in the society pages. It was Naomi Parker, the wife of the businessman." This information confirmed the suspicions of Brooks. He thanked the manager and returned to the station, where he was waiting for new information from the financial department. The last 2 months, Angela received significantly more money from Parker than usual. The last transfer, a large sum of $50,000, had been made 3 days before the murder. Blackmail? Very likely. A client's pregnant escort is a nightmare scenario for a public figure like Parker. Brooks decided to pay a visit to the Parker mansion. The luxurious colonial-style house, surrounded by a manicured garden, was located in Yerington's most prestigious neighborhood. The door was opened by a maid who escorted the detective into a spacious living room with high ceilings and antique furniture. Naomi Parker entered the room as if on a catwalk, with perfect posture and a slight smile. Her short dress emphasized her slender figure, and her flawless makeup concealed her real age. "Detective Brooks, To what do I owe the pleasure? She asked, lowering herself gracefully into the chair. Andre told me you were investigating some kind of murder. The murder of Angela Locus, Brooks answered, watching her reaction. Naomi didn't flinch, but her gaze hardened. And how does that concern me? Your husband was her client, maybe more than a client. I'm aware of my husband's hobbies, Naomi replied coldly. Andre and I agreed a long time ago on freedom in our personal lives. I'm not interested in his amusements as long as they don't jeopardize our social standing. Did you know that Ms. Locus was pregnant? This time Naomi couldn't hide her emotion. Her eyes widened with surprise, and her fingers clenched the arm of the chair. Nun ptu. That changes the situation. You recently caused a scandal at the boutique where Ms. Locus worked. What did you talk to her about? Naomi pursed her lips. I warned her to stay away from my husband. This girl started calling his house, threatening to tell everyone about their affair. It was out of line. She was blackmailing your husband? Call it what you want. She was just a common prostitute who thought she could get deeper into our pockets than usual. I just put her in her place. And how did she react? Laughed in my face. Naomi pressed her lips together. Said she had a trump card that would secure her place in Andre's life forever. Must have meant the pregnancy. Where were you Wednesday night between 8 and 10? Naomi tensed, but quickly pulled herself together. At a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. There were over 200 guests, including the mayor. You can check it out. I will. Brooks nodded. Do you have a personal driver? Of course. Thomas has been working for us for 5 years. He drove you to the fundraiser? Yes, and then he drove me home around 11 o'clock. Brooks made a note in his notebook. The alibi looked solid, but it needed checking. The detective rose, about to leave, but stopped at the door. Mrs. Parker, have you ever hired someone to solve a delicate problems? Naomi stared at him, her gaze as cold as ice. I don't know what you're talking about, detective, and I'd advise you to be careful with such insinuations. We have very good lawyers. After meeting Naomi, Brooks checked her alibi. Surveillance footage from the fundraiser confirmed that Naomi Parker arrived around 7 p.m. and left the event at 10:30. Her driver also confirmed that he had taken the hostess straight home, but that didn't remove suspicions completely. Naomi could have been acting through an intermediary. Brooks decided to meet once more with Jenna Wilson, Angela's friend. This time they met in the park, away from prying eyes. What do you know about Angela's future plans? Brooks asked as they walked leisurely down the alley. Jenna sighed. She'd often said over the past few months that she wanted to give it all up, leave Yarrington, start a new life. Because she was pregnant? You know? Jenna paused. Yeah, she found out about 2 months ago. At first she was shocked, wanted to get rid of the baby, but then she decided it was her chance. A chance for what? A chance at a normal life. Angela said the baby's father was a wealthy man who could provide for both of them. She demanded money from him, a lot of money. Did she tell you who the father was? Not directly, but I had a hunch. Parker was crazy about her, and she had a way with men. She blackmailed him? Jenna looked around nervously. Look, I don't want any trouble. But yeah, Angela threatened to tell his wife and the whole town if he didn't pay up. Said she had proof of their affair. What kind of proof? I don't know exactly. Maybe texts, pictures. Jenna hesitated. Angela was careful. She always said you had to have insurance in our business. Brooks returned to Angela's apartment, now carefully sealed by the police. If she had evidence of a connection to Parker, it had to be here. He began a methodical search, checking every drawer, every book, every object. In the bedroom, on the dressing table, was a collection of figurines. Small animal figures made of ceramic and glass. A black cat with green eyes stood out among them. Brooks picked it up, turned it around, and noticed that one of the cat's eyes reflected light differently than the other. He took a closer look and found a tiny lens skillfully inserted into the eye of the figurine. The detective's heart beat faster. It was a miniature camera, so small that it could easily have been overlooked. The statuette stood so that the camera was pointed directly at the bed. Brooks immediately called in the technicians. An expert in electronic devices quickly confirmed that the statuette did indeed contain a hidden camera with a memory card capable of recording video when motion was detected. Clever, the technician commented, removing the tiny memory card. No one would have guessed. The recordings are activated by the motion sensor and saved directly to the card. Brooks waited impatiently while the technician plugged the card into the laptop. It turned out to have several dozen video files on it, dated within the last few months. The detective watched a few. They showed Angela dating various men, including Andre Parker. These tapes were perfect blackmail material. But the most important was the last file, dated the night of the murder. It showed a man entering Angela's bedroom. His face was not in the frame, only the figure in the dark suit was visible. The footage then showed the man approaching Angela. They argue about something, and suddenly he pounces on her, clutching her neck with his hands. The struggle lasts a few seconds, then Angela's body goes limp, and the killer quickly leaves the room. Brooks stared at the screen, unable to believe his luck. The murder had been captured on video. The perpetrator's face might not be visible, but it was already serious evidence. Now he had to find a way to identify the killer and prove a connection to Naomi Parker. Because Brooks had no doubt it was a hit man, not Andre himself. And it was probably Naomi who had paid him, despite her alibi. Yerington Police Station never slept. Even at night it was a busy place, especially when it came to a high-profile murder. Detective Python Brooks sat in his dimly lit office, his eyes red with fatigue, but he couldn't tear himself away from the computer screen. The monitor scrolled over and over again to record the last minutes of Angela Laucas's life. Brooks watched the tape dozens of times, trying to find any detail that would help identify the killer. But the man seemed to be aware of the possible surveillance. He kept his back to the camera the whole time, and when he turned around, his face was out of frame. "You're a professional," Brooks muttered, stopping the video at the moment of strangulation. "No random movements, no panic. You've done this before." He was particularly interested in the killer's hands. He'd strangled Angela with gloves, thin and tight-fitting. Not the usual leather ones, but rather special gloves, possibly latex. The killer prepared in advance, so he wouldn't leave any prints. The tech department analyzed the video, but the results were disappointing. It was impossible to accurately identify the face, even using image enhancement. All they could determine was that the killer was a man about 180 centimeters tall, of strong build, presumably African American, judging by the color of the skin on his hands where the gloves didn't completely cover his wrists. Brooks realized that wasn't enough. He needed evidence linking Naomi Parker to the murder. He requested a warrant to access the Parker family's financial records, but the legal department warned that it wouldn't be easy. The family had influence and the best lawyers. Fortunately, Brooks had an acquaintance at the IRS, Derek Williams, with whom they had once worked together in the Economic Crimes Unit. Derek agreed to help unofficially. "I can't give you documents without a warrant," he said, when he met Brooks at an unremarkable cafe near the center of town. "But I can tell you where to dig." Derek said the Parker family used several companies to optimize their taxes. One of them, Onyx Consulting, was of particular interest to Brooks. The firm was officially engaged in security consulting, but almost no real activity. Recently, however, a large sum of $100,000 had passed through its accounts. "The transaction was made 4 days before the murder," Derek said quietly. "The money came from Naomi Parker's personal account, and then it was split into several small payments and withdrawn through offshore accounts." "A classic laundering scheme," Brooks nodded. "But we need to know where the money ended up." "Here's where it gets interesting." Derek leaned closer. "One of the beneficiaries of Onyx Consulting is James Rodriguez. He's ex-military and now officially works for a private security firm. But in certain circles, he's known as the man who solves delicate problems." Brooks felt his pulse racing. This could be the link that connects Naomi to the murder. "Can you give me information on Rodriguez?" Derek shook his head. "Not officially, no, but search the Marine Corps Veterans Database. He served in a special unit in the early 2000s. That was enough information." Back at the precinct, Brooks plunged into the search. James Rodriguez was indeed a veteran of an elite Marine unit, having participated in several special operations. After being discharged, he worked for private military companies in hotspots, then returned to the U.S. and took a job with Shield and Sword, a security firm owned by an ex-military man. The firm specialized in VIP security and security consulting. But what particularly interested Brooks was that Rodriguez's military height was 178 centimeters, a near-perfect match for the assassin's alleged height. Brooks requested Naomi Parker's phone records for the last month. Among the many numbers, there was one that caught his attention. Calls to this number began about 2 weeks before the murder and stopped immediately afterward. The number was registered to a company called Shield and Sword. A picture was beginning to emerge. Naomi found out about Angela's pregnancy, realized she was blackmailing her husband, and decided to fix the problem in a drastic way. She hired a professional through a shell company, paying a huge sum of money. Rodriguez, posing as a new client, broke into Angela's apartment and killed her. But the prosecution needed hard evidence. Brooks decided to look into Rodriguez's whereabouts the night of the murder. According to Shield and Sword, he was on a business trip to Chicago that day. However, a flight check showed that Rodriguez returned to Yerington in the afternoon, hours before the murder, and flew back the next morning. Brooks requested airport surveillance footage and obtained a photograph of Rodriguez, a tall, strongly built African-American man with a military bearing. Comparing his figure to the man in the video from Angela's apartment, the detective saw a clear resemblance. Now he had circumstantial evidence, a financial trail from Naomi to Rodriguez, the latter's presence in the city at the time of the murder, a physical match. But it wasn't enough to make an arrest. Brooks realized that Rodriguez would likely disappear as soon as he felt threatened, so he decided to press Naomi first, hoping she would break under the weight of the evidence. Brooks didn't arrive at the Parker mansion alone. Captain Monroe and 2 other officers were with him. The formal reason was to request additional testimony, but the real purpose was psychological pressure. Naomi met them in the living room, still as impeccable in appearance as ever, but with a barely perceptible anxiety in her eyes. "To what do I owe this attention from the police?" she asked, feigning calm. "Mrs. Parker," Brooks began, "we have discovered new evidence in the Angela Laucus murder case, and it points directly to you." Naomi pressed her lips together. "I don't know what you're talking about. My alibi is impeccable." "Yes, you were at the fundraiser," Brooks nodded. "But the killer wasn't. We know you hired James Rodriguez through Onyx Consulting, transferred $100,000 to him 4 days before the murder." Naomi's face paled, but she pulled herself together. "It's a business relationship. Mr. Rodriguez was a security consultant. In that case, would you mind if we checked your cell phone?" Brooks showed us the warrant. "We're interested in your conversations with him." "I demand to have an attorney present," Naomi said firmly. "Of course, that's your right. But here's what's interesting." Brooks pulled out a tablet and turned on the video from Angela's apartment. "We've got footage of the murder." Angela installed a hidden camera in her bedroom, apparently to blackmail her husbands. He turned the screen to Naomi. "That's a familiar figure, isn't it? Rodriguez's height, build, and those distinctive gloves, the same ones Shield and Sword uses when handling weapons. Special gloves to keep their fingers sensitive." Naomi stared at the screen, and for the first time ever, Brooks saw real fear in her eyes. I didn't want her to die," Naomi said quietly, looking away from the screen. There was silence in the room. Captain Monroe and the officers looked around in disbelief. Brooks remained calm, though inwardly jubilant that recognition was near. "Tell me what happened," he said softly, turning on the recorder. Naomi took a deep breath as if accepting the inevitable. "This woman was destroying our family. Andre was obsessed with her, spending insane amounts of money, disappearing nights, even talking about divorce. And then she got pregnant." Naomi grinned bitterly. "The oldest trick in the world. She claimed the baby was Andre's and demanded money, a lot of money. Threatened to tell everyone, embarrass us. So you decided to take her out?" "No." Naomi raised her head. "I hired Rodriguez to scare her, make her leave town, give up her demands. I was very clear, no violence, just intimidation. But he killed her." "I didn't know it would be like this," Naomi whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "When he called and said the problem was solved, I knew something had gone wrong, but it was too late." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Naomi looked at Brooks like a naive child. "And admit to organizing the attack?" Rodriguez threatened that if I talked, he'd tell everything. He had tapes of our conversations, evidence. I was trapped. Where is Rodriguez now? I don't know. Naomi shook her head. After the murder, he disappeared, took the money and disappeared. He's a pro at this kind of thing. Brooks watched Naomi carefully. Her story sounded plausible, but something made him uneasy. She confessed too easily, too clearly articulated her story, as if she'd prepared an excuse in advance. Mrs. Parker, you say you only hired Rodriguez to intimidate, but $100,000 is too much money for such a favor. Naomi lowered her eyes. It's hard to explain. Rodriguez said that for that kind of money, he'd guarantee that the problem would go away. I thought he'd make her leave, maybe arrange some kind of accident that would cause her to lose the baby, but not murder. So you were open to the possibility of violence? Yeah, I don't know what I was allowing. I was desperate. Captain Monroe signaled, and officers approached Naomi. Naomi Parker, you're under arrest on suspicion of organizing the murder of Angela Laukas. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. As the officer read her rights, Naomi stared straight ahead with a stone face. Only when the handcuffs clicked on her wrists did she whisper to Brooks, she would have died anyway. Rodriguez said she was sick, HIV positive, and knew it. Intentionally infected Andre, and through him, she could have infected me. She was a monster. Brooks frowned, surprised by this new information. He hadn't seen any mention of HIV in Angela's medical reports. Had Rodriguez lied to Naomi to justify the murder? Or was it another lie by Naomi herself? That same day, Brooks requested additional tests on Angela's body, including an HIV test. The results came back 2 days later, negative. There was no trace of the virus in Angela's blood. This information confirmed the detective's suspicions. Rodriguez, or Naomi herself, made up the story about the disease to justify the murder. Meanwhile, the police put James Rodriguez on the wanted list, but there was little hope of finding him. Professional killers of his caliber know how to disappear without a trace. All the contacts, all the addresses turned out to be fake or temporary. The only real evidence of his involvement was the murder tape and Naomi's financial trail. The district attorney, after reviewing the entire case file, decided to charge Naomi Parker with first-degree murder. Despite her claims that she did not plan Angela's death, the sum of $100,000 and her subsequent actions to cover up the crime said otherwise. Andre Parker seemed broken by the news. At the press conference he gave after his wife's arrest, he looked a decade older. He confirmed his relationship with Angela, acknowledged the possibility of paternity, but flatly denied involvement in her murder. A DNA test on the embryo confirmed Andre was indeed the father of the unborn child. On the last day of the investigation, Brooks sat in his office, rereading the case file. The murder had been solved, the perpetrators had been found, at least one of them. But the detective didn't feel the usual satisfaction. This story had no winners, only victims. Angela and her unborn child were dead. Naomi was facing years in prison, and Andre had lost both his mistress, his wife, and his child. There was a knock at the door. It was Jenna Wilson, Angela's friend. She had come to pick up some personal belongings that the police had authorized to be returned to family and friends. "How are you?" Brooks asked when she sat down across from him. "Trying to move on with my life," Jenna answered quietly. "Leaving Yarrington. Too many memories." "I understand," the detective nodded. "Can I ask one last question? Did Angela really love Parker, or was it just a calculation?" Jenna thought for a moment. "At first it was a calculation, sure, but then..." She shrugged. "I think she'd grown attached to him, wanted a normal life, a family. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. She'd stopped using protection on purpose, naively thought a baby would change everything." Brooks nodded. "It was a story as old as the world. Passion, money, jealousy, and death. A classic triangle turned into a bloody tragedy." "Thank you for finding the killer," Jenna said, standing up. "Angela deserved justice no matter what." The detective gave her a look. The case was closed, but the taste of that victory was bitter. Angela had used her pregnancy as a weapon. Naomi had paid for the murder to protect her marriage and status. and somewhere in the world now lurked a man who had strangled a young woman in cold blood for money. There were no innocents in this story, except perhaps the unborn child who never saw the light of day.